How much have you thought about the topic of emotional manipulation? It's something that has held my interest for years. I can remember considering this as a woman in my late teens and early 20s. It was always fascinating for me to observe such a thing happening, and I haven't lost my interest in it in all these years. I believe many of us engage in emotional manipulation of some sort. It's easy to dismiss manipulation as being something bad, but as I am usually apt to do, I consulted the dictionary again to check out the word manipulation. So if you look at the definitions, there are two under manipulative. The first definition defines the first use of manipulative as coming from a place of selfishness, and it uses the word unscrupulous. But then it's immediately followed by the second definition, which lists it as a skill. And I find this interesting because, in other words, it's looked at as a good thing. You know, like he was able to manipulate the tools in a skillful manner. Even in teaching, there are things which teachers use that are called manipulatives. They're aids which help children to understand concepts. They're mostly used in mathematics, things like color tiles, cubes, blocks, etc. And the children handle these manipulatives, so they maneuver them in order to understand. So what it boils down to is motive. What's the motive in it? Where are you coming from personally? What's the agenda behind the manipulation? Those dictionary definitions make a lot of sense to me because it's what I've seen throughout my life. And we can all think of examples. So I'll just list a few here. So emotional manipulation, what I've observed. I think we all have in one way or another been emotionally manipulated by a clever salesman. So, think about a car salesman. You already know that you want a car, but the more emotionally invested you get in a certain car, the salesman knows he is going to have you. And there's a better chance he's going to sell you that car, and there's probably an even better chance that you are going to pay more than what you should for that car. They're counting on that. That's how they go after you. So you take it for a test drive, and you can say, yeah, that's good. You need to know what the car feels like. But on the other side of that, when you drive the car, you get attached to it, so it becomes personal, and you want it even more. The salesman is very welcoming. He tells you all about this car, how wonderful it is. You know the shtick. I don't need to go through it. We've all experienced it as adults. So they kind of prey on your desire for that car, and they have you over a barrel if you're not willing to be objective. And that's difficult for a lot of people. It can be any type of salesman in particular. I'm really dating myself here, but I remember the days of the vacuum cleaner salesman. So I remember as a little girl when they would come to the door, and my mother would answer, and they would want to demonstrate. And the first thing they would say is, well, if you let us demonstrate this to you, we'll give you something for free. And, I don't remember. It was all different kinds of things. I think sometimes it was like a 6-pack of soda or something. Basically, it's a gimmick, right, to get them in the door. So automatically most people think, oh, how great, I'm going to get something for free, instead of spotting the motive in it. And I've always admired the people who sit through an entire presentation and say, thanks for the soda, and show the guy out the door. But most people are not like that. They cave. So the salesman comes in and he brings out these beautiful flashy vacuum cleaners, and he does these amazing demonstrations, and he shows you and he says, wow, look how dirty your carpet is. You didn't know how dirty this was, did you? Imagine all the toxins you're exposing your children to, and on, while, of course, all the while he's preying on you. And even if you think you wanted, or if you think you didn't want a new vacuum, he creates this need in you that you need this new thing. And then he has you, and you've signed up for a vacuum that you didn't think you really needed. All of a sudden you need it and you want it. Another instance I can think of is auctions. I love attending auctions, and I've done that for many years. I know this is indigenous to North America, but in America especially, there is an auction style called a fast chant or a fast talk. And if you've ever been to an auction here, the auctioneers here are very fast talkers. It's not like they're saying a whole lot. They're mostly nonsense words, but they say them quickly. It's in a cadence. It's actually psychological. It lures you into a trance, and it creates an atmosphere where you just want to buy. It's fast-paced. It can get really fast and furious at some points. And if you're getting into a bidding war with someone, they accelerate the tempo, you're raising your hand, and even though you think you know what you want to pay for a certain item, Before you know it, you're going beyond what you want to pay. It psychologically does that to you. It's rhythmic manipulation. It does something to your internal emotional state when the auctioneers do this. You get caught up in it. So when you go to an auction, you really need to know what your top price is for things. It's easy to get carried away. That's what they count on. Another one I can think of is, I don't even know if they call it this anymore, but religious revivals, or maybe like altar calls in a church. I've seen this a lot where people go to huge convention centers, auditoriums, or even stadiums, and there's a preacher or a speaker up front, and they really work the crowd. They speak in a relatable way, basically general topics which touch on the human condition, and just like that, it's a formula. Cue the music. The music starts, it plays on your emotions, it tugs the heartstrings. They make a plea. You need to listen to me. You need to come down here and profess a faith, profess a belief in this. This is what you need in your life. And all these people succumb, and they all come down the aisle and make these big professions of faith and how they're going to change their lives and live as new people. It's interesting when you look at all these things, salesmen, auctioneers, religious revivals, whatever you want to call it, and I'm sure I could just keep going on and listing them, and you could too. But what I've learned through the years is that a lot of these things are, or I should say a lot of the decisions made, whether it's your decision to buy or your decision to profess a faith, what have you, end up being decisions of impulse. They are not decisions born of thought. They are decisions born of emotion. And I believe, after all my years of studying people, most decisions made in such a fashion do not end up affecting any kind of life change, or they end in regret in some instances. So the person that goes to the auction, they paid twice as much or more for the object they wanted, so now they have a credit card debt. Or the person who made a profession of faith, they might have done it when they were young, like 15 years old, and didn't know any better, and they were persuaded by some fast talker or some musical group. And then 10 years later, they're saying, well, I don't believe in this stuff, because they were emotionally manipulated. It was an impulsive decision, and it rarely results in something good, I guess, or any kind of life-changing behavior. I'm able to observe it even more with the advent of social platforms, here on YouTube, for example. I like to study people. I like to watch videos. I look at many different areas, not necessarily typology, but many different things. And I've made some interesting observations when it comes to emotional manipulation. I see that in a lot of ways. It's like the preacher. It's like the salesman. I wonder what they're trying to sell. People make these videos which are emotionally manipulative, right? They share stories of grief, bad experiences in life, loss, etc. And these are very good topics to touch upon. I'm certainly not criticizing the topic. It's the way they're handled that's interesting to me. In a way, it's hard to doubt a person's sincerity, because they're speaking about the loss of a loved one, or they're speaking of their grief, or they're speaking about a very personal experience. But then they present this video where they're speaking about this loss or loved one, and then it's highly edited in such a way where it becomes more about the person making the video that kind of leaves me cold. It almost leaves me feeling like their bad experience or their loss is kind of a cash cow to more views and more subscribers. It's the way it's done, I think, that makes me question. I kind of watch all this play out. They come away from it with what I perceive to be shallow lessons from it. Like when you can sum up the death of a loved one by saying, I've learned life is just too short. Love everyone you can while you can. And I think to myself, is that all you learned from that? And a lot of people, maybe it's an immaturity, and maybe they never get past that stage in life. And I realize that for many people, those kinds of lessons are enough. Maybe it is all they learn, but it's not very deep. And how many people does that really touch? If someone were to come up to me at this point with what I've experienced in my life and say to me, well, losing your parents is good because now life is too short and you just have to be happy and love people. I would just feel that my loss was undermined in some way. That my experience was made nothing because it's such a trite sentiment. When you've experienced great loss in life and that's all you come out with, it seems like a dishonor in a way to the experience. You have to mine for these lessons in life. They don't always present themselves so easily. When you come out of an experience and that's all you have to show for it, you didn't really do any mining. You didn't really dig deep because it's painful, right? You have to ask, what deep things can I take away from this? And especially as an INFJ type, how can I use this to help others? What have I learned to really help others in a way that truly affects change? It's interesting studying all these things and then reflecting on it, because guess what? I've done it too, this emotional manipulation. So speaking personally, I'm a musician. I perform for major life events, weddings, funerals, and such. These events are naturally emotionally charged to start. I'm there. I'm hired to add my touch. I'm part of the event. The people who have asked me to perform want me to create emotions such as joy, sorrow, happiness, remembrance, etc. So in my musical performances, I really put my all into it. I purposefully want to be manipulative in it, and I want to use my music in a skillful way to manipulate people, to have them be affected by it. So when I perform, I am emotionally manipulative. That's always my goal, to affect the people who are listening and to affect them profoundly. There is a skill in music making. Music is profound and it can touch people on the deepest levels, and I believe it can be done in all sincerity and truth. So that's musical performances. But what about here in this place? I see people on YouTube using tears to elicit emotional response and using music and editing, all these things which create this emotional response in us. I see them being used. I've done it too. I've spoken of grief here. I've used music. I've edited. We all do it, right? But if you go back to the definition of manipulative, it's saying that sometimes it's self-serving in a bad sort of way, and sometimes it's skillful in a good sort of way. It depends on your motive. And this is where it gets dicey, right? Because as an individual, you have to determine the motive behind the person who is emotionally manipulating you in this way. Think about it. That car salesman. He might really think that he's doing a good service, by helping people get a new car. People buy cars, people use cars. He might in his heart believe that he's doing a good thing. That vacuum cleaner salesman, maybe he's thinking that he's really helping people. He really wants people to have clean homes and he wants people to have the best product that they possibly can. Maybe that preacher or speaker, in some way, they believe that they are really helping people to change their lives in some way. These people are using manipulation skillfully. They've learned the skill of manipulation, but they believe that they're doing it for altruistic reasons. And sometimes I believe that someone who is emotionally manipulating another doesn't necessarily realize they are doing it. In some cases, as I've addressed before in other videos, the person is doing it for emotional validation for their own selves. They're doing it to receive support. Maybe it's because they don't ultimately feel worthy, so they need the approval and validation of others to feel good about themselves. And while I can feel sorry for this because I've been there, and I'm sure I've done it, in a way it is selfish because it's self-serving. It's using other people you don't necessarily care about in any way to build up your own ego. And is that really a good thing to do to other people? So I guess what it comes down to is someone's motive behind it. Emotional manipulation has two sides. Is it used for selfish or altruistic intentions? Well, it all depends, doesn't it? It depends on the motivation behind it. If you're doing it for selfish reasons, then it's probably not a good thing. But if you're doing it in all sincerity, it can be a very good thing. Basically, I think it's up to the individual to decide. It's something we all have to weigh as we go through life and have these experiences. How are we being emotionally manipulated? Will the end result be growth or regret? What would you rather experience? So be wise in what you watch and listen to.